This is Heliox, where evidence meets empathy. Independent, moderated, timely, deep, gentle, clinical, global, and community conversations about things that matter. Breathe easy. We go deep and lightly surface the big ideas.
So, nasal vaccines for COVID. Huh. Lots of buzz, right? What's the deal? Are they the real deal or just hype? We're going to find out.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of excitement for good reason. I think what's really interesting about nasal vaccines is their potential to do something that, the current shots haven't really done well.
Block transmission.
Yeah, even if you are vaccinated and protected from serious illness, you can still spread it.
That's right.
So these nasal vaccines, they aim to stimulate an immune response, like right where the virus enters.
Yeah.
In your nose and throat, the mucous membrane.
Like setting up a barrier at the front door, basically.
Exactly.
Makes sense. Now I'm seeing here that there is research happening globally.
Yes, all over the world.
On nasal vaccines.
But for this deep dive, we're going to focus on the 6 U.S. trials in progress, the ones most likely to have a direct impact on you. Right.
Makes sense. All right, so let's dig into those U.S. trials then.
Yeah.
We're using Eric Topol's Ground Truths article as our main source here. He's a leading medical expert, and this piece is recent, February 14th, 2025, update.
Oh, great source. Yeah, he gives a really good overview of the current landscape.
It sure does. All right, first up, CastleVax.
CastleVax. So they're a spin out from Mount Sinai's Icahn School of Medicine. They've received $34 million in funding from BARDA, the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, through Project NextGen.
Okay, and they're using a live but weakened Newcastle disease virus.
Right.
So that's a virus that affects birds, right?
Yeah, that's right. They've modified it to express the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein, and that's what the virus uses to enter our cells. And to make it even more effective, they've stabilized the spike protein with 6 prolines.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so I'm seeing here that they've had some promising results in animal studies.
Yeah, a single dose of this nasal vaccine completely blocked transmission of several COVID variants in hamsters and mice.
Wow.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, that's impressive. Although I guess, animal studies don't always translate perfectly to humans, right?
That's true, but it's a positive sign, And they're currently running a phase 2 trial with 10,000 participants here in the U.S., and they've got trials going on in Mexico and Thailand, too.
Okay, lots of activity there. Next on the list is Ocugen. Now, they're taking a slightly different approach, aren't they?
They are. They're using a live attenuated version of the SARS-CoV-2 virus itself.
Ah.
So they've completed a phase 1 trial and are now running a large trial supported by the WHO and a phase 2B trial in the U.S.
Okay, so both CastleVax and Ocugen are using live viruses, just different ones. Now we have Sinovac Blue Lake, and they're using a viral vector.
Yeah, that's right. Their vaccine uses a parainfluenza virus, so basically a common cold virus, to deliver the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein.
Interesting. And they kicked off a huge phase 2B trial back in December 2024 with 10,000 participants. They're directly comparing their nasal vaccine to Moderna's intramuscular shot.
Yep. It's a double-blind randomized trial, the gold standard, right, for this kind of research. And the main goal is to see how well it prevents COVID infections compared to, the current standard.
Okay, so we won't have those final results for a while, though, right? Enrollment is expected to wrap up in June 2026.
Yeah, and large-scale trials like this, they take time, aiming to publish results sometime in 2027.
Okay, on to the next one. The National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, NIAA for short. They've got 2 nasal vaccine trials going on.
They do.
At the same time.
Yep. So their first trials using a live attenuated parainfluenza virus modified with the 6P spike protein. And this phase 1 trial started enrolling participants back in 2023 at Johns Hopkins. 27 people total.
Oh, wow. That's a small study.
Yeah.
And then their second trial is also in phase 1, enrolling 60 participants.
Yes. This one is using a murine pneumonia virus vector to deliver the spike protein. And it's specifically looking at the nasal vaccine as a booster after, the traditional shots.
Interesting. Have they had any promising preclinical data for that one?
Yeah, they've seen strong immune responses and no safety concerns in rodent and non-human primate models.
That's great. Okay, last but not least, we have Ocugen.
Ocugen. Now, this one has a kind of a fascinating backstory. Initially developed at Washington University, but was licensed to Bharat Biotech in India.
And get this, it's already been approved and it's being used in India.
Yeah, it's available there.
Okay, so why are we still in phase 1 trials here in the U.S.?
That's a great question. Well, we haven't seen the full clinical data from the phase 3 trial in India yet. Especially data on actual clinical outcomes. How well it prevents infections, hospitalizations, deaths. So the FDA wants to see. They want to see that data before considering approval here.
Yeah, that makes sense. We have pretty strict regulations for drug approvals here in the U.S.
We do, and until we have that data, it's hard to say. How quickly Ocugen's vaccine might be approved here in the U.S. But, if the data from India is strong, it could potentially speed up the process.
So this U.S. trial is enrolling 80 adults and testing 2 different doses of the nasal vaccine plus an inhaled version.
Right, and the technology itself uses an adenovirus vector, similar to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine.
To carry the spike protein.
Yeah, they're hoping to see, if it performs similarly here in the U.S.
Wow. Okay, so we've covered all 6 U.S. nasal vaccine trials. There's a lot going on.
A lot going on, yeah. It's an exciting area of research, a lot of potential.
Definitely. Now, before we move on, are there any specific trials that stand out to you? Anything that you're like, ooh, that's interesting?
Well, the CastleVax results, with blocking transmission in animals, those are certainly, noteworthy. It raises an important question, right? Could this be the key to achieving true herd immunity against COVID?
Ooh, that's a big question, one that we'll need to explore further. So let's dive a little deeper into some of these trials. You mentioned the CastleVax results.
Yeah.
What is it about their approach that's so intriguing?
Well, it's really how this vaccine seems to be working, right? It's not just about preventing you from getting sick. It's about stopping the virus from spreading to others altogether.
Yeah, that's what we've all been hoping for, right?
Yeah.
And if it works in humans, as well as it did in those animal studies,
Right.
game changer.
Absolutely. I mean, imagine if we had a simple nasal spray that could really significantly reduce transmission rates. We could finally get ahead of this thing, potentially achieve true herd immunity, which has been so hard with the current vaccines.
Okay, so CastleVax is one to keep an eye on. What about Ocugen? I mean, it seems a little odd that a vaccine that's already being used in India is still in phase 1 trials here.
Yeah, it does seem counterintuitive, but there's a few reasons for this. Firstly, regulatory agencies in different countries have different standards and requirements. What's considered enough evidence for approval, in India might not be enough for the FDA here in the U.S.
Right, we have pretty strict regulations for drug approvals here.
Exactly. And secondly, we haven't seen that full clinical data from the phase 3 trial in India yet. We know they've shown, a really strong immune response as a booster, but we need that data on actual clinical outcomes, like how well does it actually prevent infections, hospitalizations, and deaths?
Right, so the FDA wants to make sure that those promising immune responses, actually translate into real-world protection.
Exactly.
And also maybe data on if it reduces transmission.
Precisely. Until we have that data, it's hard to say how quickly Ocugen's vaccine will be approved here in the U.S. But, if that data from India is strong, it could potentially speed up the process.
Okay, so we've got these exciting developments, but I imagine there are also some challenges, ahead for nasal vaccines.
With the new administration, there's uncertainty about the future of COVID research funding.
Right, and those large phase 2B trials are going to take years to complete.
Yeah.
And cost hundreds of millions of dollars.
It's a valid concern. Lack of funding could definitely hinder progress. And then there's the question of, durability.
Right.
Will these nasal vaccines offer that long-lasting protection, or will we need frequent boosters? We just don't have those answers yet.
Okay, so lots of potential, lots of unknowns.
Yeah.
For our listener who might be thinking, okay, this is all very interesting, but what does it mean for me right now? What would you say?
Well, I would say that understanding the landscape of nasal vaccine development is really key to being, an informed citizen and patient. Even if you're not rushing out to get a nasal vaccine today, knowing what's in the pipeline, the challenges involved, what to look for in future news, it'll just help you, navigate this evolving world of COVID.
It's like having a roadmap, I guess, for the future of COVID prevention.
Yeah. Exactly.
And while this deep dive focuses on nasal vaccines for COVID,
Hmm.
the potential applications of this technology, it goes beyond that, right?
Oh, absolutely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this research could pave the way for nasal vaccines against other respiratory viruses like influenza, RSV, maybe even the common cold. Imagine that, significantly reducing the burden of these, seasonal illnesses with a simple nasal spray.
Now, that's a future I can get behind.
Yeah,
So even though there's more research to be done, yeah, it's clear that these nasal vaccines hold immense promise.
they do.
They could really revolutionize how we approach not just COVID, eradicating diseases. I mean, that's a concept that feels more like a history lesson than a future possibility.
It is a big idea, but we've done it before, right? Smallpox is a prime example. We're close with polio. And, nasal vaccines, with their ability to potentially, stop transmission right at the source, it could be our weapon against these persistent respiratory viruses.
Okay, I see what you mean. But let's be real. Eradication, it's a long shot, right? I mean, a lot of things would have to fall into place for that to happen.
Of course, what widespread global vaccination is crucial, along with, seamless international cooperation. We'd need a really robust surveillance system to quickly identify and contain any outbreaks. And then there's the challenge of viruses mutating, which could make vaccines less effective over time.
There's so many hurdles to clear. But even if we don't achieve, complete eradication, the potential benefits of nasal vaccines are still huge, right?
Oh, absolutely. Even a significant reduction in transmission rates would be a huge win. We
Yeah.
could, better protect vulnerable populations, prevent healthcare systems from being overwhelmed, and, get closer to that sense of normalcy we all crave.
So it's about more than just individual protection. It's about the potential for wider impact
Exactly.
on public health.
Nasal vaccines could really fundamentally change how we approach disease prevention and management.
Okay, so for our listener who's been following along, what what are the key takeaways here? What should they be paying attention to as this research continues?
Well, I'd say keep an eye on the progress of these trials, particularly the ones that are in, phase 2 and 3. Look for data on how well these vaccines are, preventing infection, reducing transmission, and how long that protection lasts.
And what about those trials that are happening outside of the U.S.? Should we be following those too?
Oh, absolutely. While we focused on the U.S. trials for this deep dive, there's important research happening globally. Keep in mind that different countries might have different, regulatory processes and timelines for approval.
Right, so something that gets approved in India might not necessarily be available here in the U.S. right away.
Exactly. But staying informed about those global developments can give you a broader perspective on, the progress of nasal vaccine research as a whole.
Okay, so stay informed, stay curious, don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah.
There's still a lot to learn and discover in this field.
That's the beauty of science. It's a constantly evolving journey. And with these nasal vaccines, we might be, witnessing the start of a whole new era in disease prevention.
Now, you mentioned earlier that this technology could potentially be applied to other respiratory viruses besides COVID.
Yeah.
Let's unpack that a little bit. What other diseases could we target with nasal vaccines?
Oh, the possibilities are really exciting. Influenza or the flu, is a prime candidate. We already have flu vaccines, of course, but they aren't always as effective as we'd like them to be. A nasal vaccine for the flu could offer better protection and potentially even, reduce transmission.
That would be a game changer, especially during flu season.
It would be, yeah. Another target is RSV, respiratory syncytial virus. It's a common respiratory virus that can be especially dangerous for infants and young children.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading that there's been a lot of progress in developing RSV vaccines, recently.
There has, yeah. And a nasal vaccine for RSV, could be a really valuable tool in protecting that vulnerable population.
Okay, so flu, RSV. What else? Could we even target, the common cold with a nasal vaccine?
Now, that one's a bit trickier because, the common cold is actually caused by, a whole bunch of different viruses, not just one. But, researchers are exploring the possibility of developing what's called a broad spectrum nasal vaccine that could actually target multiple cold viruses at once.
Wow, that would be incredible. Imagine a world where we could, significantly reduce the number of colds we get every year.
It's a possibility worth exploring, and it really highlights the potential of this technology, to not just address like our current health challenges, but to actually prevent, future outbreaks.
Yeah, it's like we're on the cusp of, a new frontier in preventive medicine. So much potential for impact.
Exactly. And, it all kind of stems from this simple yet powerful idea,
Yeah.
delivering vaccines right to the site where those respiratory viruses enter the body.
So while we've been, focused on COVID, this deep dive has really opened my eyes to the broader, possibilities
Mm-hmm.
of nasal vaccines.
Yeah. It's a real testament to the, ingenuity and creativity of the scientific community. They're constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the final message for our listener? What should they be taking away from this exploration of nasal vaccines?
I'd say, embrace the excitement and the host that this research brings. Nasal vaccines hold tremendous potential to really revolutionize how we protect ourselves and our communities from these respiratory viruses. Stay informed, follow the science, and be a part of this, this exciting journey towards, a healthier future.
Beautifully said. And for our listener out there, keep those questions coming. We'll be back for another deep dive soon. Thanks for listening today. 4 recurring narratives underlie every episode: boundary dissolution, adaptive complexity, embodied knowledge, and quantum-like uncertainty. These aren't just philosophical musings, but frameworks for understanding our modern world. We hope you continue exploring our other podcasts, responding to the content, and checking out our related articles at helioxpodcast.substack.com.